This is Peter Sykes introducing the 300th edition of the Enfield Microphone, dateline 29th of September 1974. Once again, June Chew, Patricia Albert, Dennis Goodwin and me, Peter Sykes, are here for this very special occasion. And as this is the 300th edition of the Enfield Microphone, we thought it would be a suitable occasion to go back in time and tell new listeners how it all began. The news tape was started by Toc H, so who better to tell us about it than John and Gladys Dredge, who were closely involved in the scheme from the beginning.
It started in 1960. I remember one Friday night I was going to Toc H, and Maurice Strivens, who some of you may remember, an old Toc H member, put the project to me in a car, and I was very keen on it. So we mentioned it at the branch meeting, and the chaps got interested, and Maurice Strivens arranged to see the manager of Howard's, the radio shop in the town, and the manager agreed to let us have 2 Simon Symbol tape recorders and maintain them free of charge, provided they were used for the blind. He also went along to see the editor of the Enfield Gazette, and he got his cooperation as well, and Richard Collinson was the reporter at the time. He'd done a lot of work with the project, and Miss Albert, of course, who was there from the beginning. And I appreciate it myself because I'd never been able to read a newspaper. But I was in the retail news agency trade for over 30 years. I've never actually been able to read a paper. I was sending them to the public. So, of course, it was quite a boon to me.
Thank you very much. Gladys, it was about 1960.
About 1960, yes. I remember Christopher was about 11, because I remember one night we used to, from time to time, have difficulty with readers. Usually it was the Toc H men, and they were involved in other things, and they couldn't always come, so sometimes they were short of readers, and one night we had 2, and they brought Christopher in to do it, and I think he then was the youngest reader. He has read on it since he's grown up, but he doesn't do it now. But now a family tradition is kept up by Peter Sykes, our nephew, and we are very grateful, we always have been, for this Enfield microphone, which comes round to us fortnightly, and we get all the news on it. It's lovely for both of us to listen to. It's nice also to keep contact with Miss Albert, because as most of you know now, she's left Enfield as a home teacher, but she's still our Enfield mic contact, which is lovely.
Oh, well, thank you for those kind words. And you, of course, were probably the first listeners, and probably the last of the first listeners remaining. I can't think of anyone else.
Mrs. West, who is now no longer with us.
And how many people did Toc H sort of get round?
Oh, I just didn't work out. There's about 12, yes. The 2 machines used to go round to 6 to 7 people, but they used to go round once a week then, and it was rather an involved transport business, because not only did the Toc H men read on the tape each week, but they used to provide the transport. And we had a little shop at the time, and as we were always open, or more or less always open, available anyway, and on the spot, and we had a telephone, I used to look after the transport part of it, and it was a headache at times, especially when the machines went wrong or the tapes all came undone, and it was a hectic job to get them all back into their cassettes.
Well, I think the North London Tape and Hi-Fi Club became involved some time late in 1961. Yes, about 18 months after, 2 years or something like that.
2 years. I would think about 62 they took over. I'm not sure, but I think it was 62. It may have been earlier. But it was, well, it got too big for the few men. Everybody wanted the Enfield mic, and gradually it got bigger and bigger as the news got round that this news tape was available. The blind people said, oh, can we have it? We'd like it to come to us. And, of course, the little branch at, well, the branch at Toc H couldn't cope with it all, and they hadn't got the equipment or the manpower to cope. So Miss Albert, I think, suggested that perhaps the North London Tape and Hi-Fi Club would be interested. And although the Toc H men for a little while did help with the reading, gradually it went all over to them. They've done a marvellous job.
Well, I think we've still got a contact in Toc H, because Mrs. Constable still takes the tape round. Yes. I've just thought of Mrs. Skelton, who was one of the first listeners, and she will be 98 in October.
And there's also another one, an elderly lady who'll be 97 at the end of December, 31st of December, Mrs. Rogers of Cecil Road. Happy birthday, Mrs. Rogers, from Mr. and Mrs. Dredge, and of course to Mrs. Skelton, who we've heard a lot about. And if there are any other listeners who were in at the beginning or almost at the beginning, we'd like to wish them all the best for the next 300 editions.
Yes, I was going to say 300 years. We're not that old. Back to Stock H, I think they do still interest themselves in the blind people, don't they?
Oh, well, yes. We would always do anything, being a member of the branch, we're getting it in both ends, the receiving end and from the point of view of arranging different things.
When the North London Tape and Hi-Fi Club took over, they expanded the service and gradually increased the number of listeners to 60. 30 Riddler Road became the centre of the organisation, and Mary, Richard and Joe Collinson were mainly responsible for the production of the tape, copying and distributing the machines to the drivers. When Richard went to Australia, Ron and Den Goodwin took over the production of the tape. Listeners who knew the Collinson family will be glad to know that they have settled happily in Gloucestershire, running a village store and post office, which is doing well even in these hard times. During the week, Richard lives and works in Uxbridge, but on a recent visit to Enfield, he recorded this message.
When you leave a town you've lived in for years, you have to leave behind friends, as well as your own mental picture of what that town looks like. I left Enfield a couple of years ago. I return often enough to see the friends, but not often enough to keep up with the changes. Shops change hands, others are knocked down. Traffic lights are put up, and road systems altered. Not necessarily changes for the worse, but each one inevitably turns Enfield into someone else's town. Still, some things do stay the same, like the Enfield microphone. It seems wonderful that the rather primitive recording and dubbing sessions we fumbled about with in the early 1960s should have developed into a quite streamlined setup that still brings you the news in your own homes. While I'm something of an outsider now, I still have a great fondness for the Enfield microphone. And may the Enfield mic remain as familiar to all of us in the 1980s.
Since the Collisons left, the Enfield microphone has had two different teams producing the tape. First, the Bob Williams, Keith Parker and Pete White group, and then the strange lot whose voices you hear now. A group of people who remain very faithful to the cause are the drivers, who take the tapes round to the people in their homes. These drivers, and to ladies on foot, have in many cases become personal friends of the listeners they visit, and have lent a helping hand where needed. Sid Hale has been with the organisation for many years, and he is responsible for delivering the tapes to the other drivers, as well as visiting 3 blind people. Pat first asked Sid about his round.
It's a very pleasant round. I've made a lot of friends in the few years that I've been working for the Enfield microphone. I call on Mr. Parry, Mrs. Mitchell, Mrs. Constable, who in turn passes it on to Tom May, Mrs. Jose, George Witchett, Wally Haslam, go up to Mr. Smith in Purcell Road. He's our latest driver. He's making a good job of it too. Also had to call on a home, Parkfield House at Hadley Wood. They're a lively bunch of young ladies up there, and I always enjoy their company. They're the drivers I have to call on, and of course I have my own listeners, Mrs. Burse and Mr. Arnold and Mr. Smith. Now Mr. Smith is 91 this week, and I'm going to his reception on Saturday with my wife. Many happy returns to the day, Charles, and I hope to see you again next year and many years afterwards. Don't make me drunk Saturday, will you? I know you won't.
Well, I know you do other odd jobs to people as you go around, Sid, and you don't mention it at all, but is there anyone who chucks you out?
Very few. I think Charles is going to chuck me out on Saturday.
Thanks very much.
Our postal service, sending tapes to listeners who have their own machines, has been running for about 2 years, and we are very grateful to the post office for allowing us free postal facilities for our tapes. 2 other people deserve a mention. Colin Hall, whose voice is never heard on the tape, but who is responsible for helping Patricia with the copying of the tapes, and Bernard Crowe, who repairs the Enfield microphone machines when they break down. Bernard is probably known to many of you as he repairs the talking book machines for the library.
I was asked by Pat Albert to join forces with the recording team on the production of this memorable edition. Unfortunately, working and holiday commitments prevented my being there on the actual night, and so a recorded contribution was the best I could offer. Perhaps I've been a rather erratic contributor to the news tape during the last few years by virtue of being one of the backroom boys, as it were, my main concern being the maintenance of the Nuffield talking book machines, with the addition of the Enfield mic machines at a much later stage. Strolling down memory lane more years ago than I care to precisely state, when I first came to Enfield, the talking book service was in the disc phase. That is, the books were recorded on many, many discs, which actually were a few years ahead of the long-playing records that we know today. I think there was even one copy of the Bible in the library, which ran to nearly 800 discs. There was a cunning device on the pickup for locating the precise start of the record, which the blind person could operate exactly every time. Also, of course, there were many service calls for needle changing, etc. The first cassette machines then appeared, and the cassette itself was a monster affair weighing many pounds, which often got damaged and out of alignment in the post. These ran on a very wide tape, which could accommodate up to 18 tracks. But this was a great step forward, since all but the longest books could be accommodated on one cassette. Now, of course, we have moved on to the Mark IV machine, with its postcard-sized cassette providing up to 6 tracks at 2.5 hours per track, which is enough for a moderate-length book. Apart from the fiction library, many books have been produced for students in many languages and are now circulated by many countries throughout the world. It has given me great pleasure and satisfaction to have worked with the Talking Book Library through its many changing phases. It is gradually hoped to replace all the old adapted machines with the latest Mark IV machine, but with about 120 new applicants per week and nearly 50,000 machines in the field, you will understand it will take some time. The service, too, is being extended to handicapped people as well as blind persons, and many of the service engineers, like myself, have offered our resources to the new organisation, as they will be using identical machines and cassettes. One of the more exciting aspects of the service job is the visiting of blind persons in their own homes. I am always amazed at how well and cheerful and pleased they are to see me when I call. I always come away feeling spiritually serviced after chats which sometimes last for a very long time. There are many other things I could report on, but since the greatest crime in broadcasting is to overrun, this is Bernard Crowe from backstage at the Enfield microphone, saying cheerio till next time.
Well, Bernard's contribution brings our reminiscences to an end for this edition, so now over to Patricia with news.
A Bush Hill Park man who was said to have traded in human misery was jailed for 4 years at Chelmsford Crown Court when he admitted assisting the entry of 6 illegal immigrants. The court was told by Mr. Alan Green, prosecuting, that a single-engine plane ferrying the illegal immigrants from France to England flew into a trap. Police officers, acting on a tip-off, waited nearly 2 hours until the plane arrived at Audley End near Saffron Walden, Essex, he said. Then they arrested 35-year-old Peter James Shaw, described as a wholesaler of Village Road, Bush Hill Park, and 33-year-old Heinrich Holt, a freelance pilot of Germany. Both men pleaded guilty to a charge of assisting the entry of 5 Indians and 1 Pakistani on June the 9th. Holt was jailed for 12 months, but Shaw, who was said by Mr. Green to be part of a sophisticated gang, was sent to prison for 4 years. Judge Peter Greenwood told them this type of offence, trading in human misery, is done for greed and, in my view, calls for severe punishment, if only to deter others.
An Enfield man was rushed to hospital with both legs broken after an accident at the junction of Baker Street and Bell Road on Wednesday the 18th of September. Mr. Stephen Robert Banya, aged 25, of 246 Baker Street, was hit by a van which then turned onto its side. He also suffered head injuries. A spokesman at Chase Farm Hospital described his condition as fairly satisfactory. The van driver, Mr. Brian V. Goodman, aged 21, of 29 Willow Road, was also taken to hospital with a cut head, but he was not detained.
Residents on the Suffolk's estate at Enfield Highway, where council houses are being modernised, have been packing out the show house on the estate since it opened on Monday, 9th of September. Despite the efforts of vandals who have smashed windows and broken pipes in the show house at 11 Oldbury Road, residents have been able to see exactly how modernisation will change their homes. More than 500 council houses are included in the £3 million council improvement scheme, which is due to be completed by September next year. Since the contractors moved onto the site in July, there has been criticism of the work that has been carried out and protest at the fact that the residents are given no choice in the matter. All the houses are to be modernised. But on the other hand, residents have said that they are quite happy with the way the work has been done. There has been praise for the scheme itself and praise for the end product.
Rain did not prevent more than 60 people gathering at Chase Green on Sunday afternoon, 15th of September, for the annual Battle of Britain Remembrance Service. At the service, which was conducted by the Reverend Michael Sherman, Vicar of St Luke's, flags representing the Royal British Legion, the Burma Star Association, the Royal Artillery Association, and the Enfield branch of the Royal Air Forces Association were lowered in memory of those who died. A wreath was also laid by Air Commodore John McAlevey, the president of the Enfield branch of the RAFA.
Mrs. Olive Whitworth, who will be known to quite a few listeners because she was the president of the Enfield Afternoon Blind Club, died recently at the age of 86. She was the founder and chairman of the Chase Non-Ferrous Metal Company in Jennerton Road. She was associated with the die-casting industry for more than 58 years. Her husband, the late Mr. Leslie Whitworth, founded Dyson and Company, the former Ponders End firm of die-casters, in 1915 in partnership with some friends. Mrs. Whitworth was closely associated with him in the business. In 1933 she decided to start her own business. She borrowed £150 and took over a blacksmith shop in Windmill Hill. The company moved to the present site after the war. A resident of Little Park Gardens since her marriage in 1915, Mrs. Whitworth was closely associated with St Andrew's Church, where a memorial service conducted by the Reverend Peter Morgan was held. She was a member of the parochial church council.
Work on the first stage of the long-awaited rebuilding of Chase Farm Hospital is now expected to be completed by the end of December, 18 months behind schedule. The delay, which has been caused mainly by shortages of labour and materials in the building industry, will mean that the final bill will be substantially more than the original figure of £1,695,069. The first stage will provide new staff accommodation, an operating suite, an X-ray department, an intensive care unit, an accident centre and a 90-bed maternity block. The contractors, Sir Lindsay Parkinson and Company, are also working on the second and third phases of the redevelopment. The building of a £1 million mental illness unit, which was originally due to be completed 3 months ago, and the construction of a 180-bed mentally handicapped unit. Mr. Gordon Beverley, press officer for the North East Thames Regional Health Authority, who inherited the building contracts from the former North East Metropolitan Regional Hospital Board, said recently, "The final bill will reflect the rising cost of labour and raw materials, but we cannot give an estimate of what it is likely to be because prices are still fluctuating. Every contract had an inbuilt inflationary clause, and the final figure was subject to the extra costs which would have to be added to the bill."
A 13-year-old Enfield boy who died after falling from a 50-foot oak tree in Bullsmore Lane was afraid of heights. It was stated at St Pancras Coroner's Court recently. A verdict of accidental death was recorded at the inquest on Christopher Pierce of Bridge End Road, Bullsmore, who died at Whittington Hospital on September 9th, the day after the fall. The boy's father, Mr John Pierce, told the court it was the first time he had climbed a tree. He was afraid of heights.
A police helicopter hovered over Ponders End on Friday the 13th of September as part of a big manhunt following a wages snatch. A lone raider, possibly armed, got away with £350 from outside the premises of Chubb Alarms, the security firm, near the corner of Southbury Road and High Street. Police swooped on the area as soon as the alarm was raised, but the man had disappeared. They also interviewed shoppers and shopkeepers in the area in a search for witnesses. The raid happened at 10:30 in the morning as Mr M. Ford, a Chubb employee, was bringing the wages to the factory. He parked in the factory forecourt, took a leather-bound box from his car, and then felt something being pushed in his back. A man demanded the money, which he handed over, and the raider fled. No description of the man has been issued.
Enfield residents are being urged to join forces in the fight for improved local bus services. The call comes from Mr. Gordon Dixon, the Enfield and Haringey representative on the London Transport Passengers Committee, the service's public watchdog. At a meeting recently, the committee will receive a report on services in Enfield, including suggested improvements. But Mr. Dixon told the Gazette that the best way to get action was for individual residents and groups to write to the committee to show the strength of local feeling. The report from the General Purposes Subcommittee says that further information is being gathered in support of a call from the Federation of Enfield Residents and Allied Associations that the 135 route should be extended along Carterhatch Lane to form an east-west link between the Beefeater, formerly the halfway house, and the Hertford Road. Anyone who has observations on the local bus service should write to the committee, Middlesex Guild Hall, Parliament Square, London, SW1.
While still on the subject of queries on transport services, a night nurse returning home from duty at Highlands Hospital had to wait nearly 2 hours on Monday the 16th of September for a W9 Toy Town bus. Miss E.M. Hart, who campaigned for a bus link between Enfield and the hospital, said the buses were supposed to run every 20 minutes, but she had to wait from 7:45 a.m. until 9:40 a.m. before a bus came. The situation, she said, was impossible for staff and visitors, and the service had gradually deteriorated over the past month. A spokesman for London Transport said that that Monday morning only one of the 3 buses supposed to be on the route was running due to mechanical defects. He agreed the service had been affected in recent weeks due to the delay in the delivery of spare parts and a shortage of engineering staff. The manager at the Ponders End bus garage said that the minibuses seemed to have mechanical troubles all the time.
The conversion of Clay Hill House into a halfway house in the rehabilitation process for the mentally ill is likely to cost nearly $150,000, it was stated at a meeting of the Borough Council's Social Services Committee. The scheme, which was put back in April because of cuts in the capital building programme, could also involve the demolition of Clay Hill House Lodge, a building listed as being of special architectural merit. It is intended to provide 25 places at Clay Hill House for long-stay mentally ill people who no longer need to be kept in hospital. The borough architect, Mr. Dowell, said the lodge was a listed building which the council had an obligation to maintain, but it is in such a state of dilapidation and the cost of repairs and restoration would be so high that it would not be worthwhile, he said. Its walls are only 4.5 inches thick. It just is not habitable. An attempt was made to make it habitable some years ago, but it was found to be too expensive, he added.
The Enfield Borough Show might be held annually in future. The Borough Council's Civic Amenities Committee are currently looking into this possibility. The committee asked recently for a report to be prepared for discussion at the next meeting of the Enfield Show Subcommittee. It is envisaged that if the subcommittee recommend an annual show, and this is ratified by the full committee at their next meeting on October the 14th, there might still be time to organise a show for next year.
A dairy company were fined a total of £100 and ordered to pay £30 costs at Tottenham Magistrates Court for selling short-weight cakes at their shop in Bramley Road, Oakwood. The court was told that the short-weight cakes were found by Mr. Meroff, a senior trading standard officer for the borough, when he made a routine visit to the shop, which is run by the Express Dairy Company. Mr. Meroff weighed 11 Irish fruit cakes and cherry cake loaves and 9 cherry fruit cakes, which had been made and pre-packed by Gatto Limited of Dublin. All 20 were found to be less than the stated weight, and 5 of them, 1 fruit and cherry cake and 4 cherry and 4 fruit cakes, were inspected and weighed again. The manageress told Mr. Meroff that the cakes had been in the shop for several months and they had not been checked or weighed while they were there. Mr. Meroff was unable to see any invoices relating to the supply of the cakes, either at the shop or later at the company's offices.
A scathing attack on the condition of the kitchens at North Middlesex Hospital, Edmonton, has been made by one of the hospital's trade union leaders. If the public only knew about the state of the kitchens, it would deter them from sending their relations to the hospital, as they would be afraid of food poisoning, he claimed. In an interview, Mr. Bill Marsden, branch chairman of the Confederation of Health Service Employees at North Middlesex, protested. 1. That the kitchen has deteriorated to such an extent that the staff are in danger of injury. 2. That grease and condensation dripping from the kitchen roof can fall into the food. 3. That the staff changing rooms are a dirty, filthy pigsty with no proper toilets, showers or restrooms. And 4. That cockroaches and mice have been found in disused ovens. Mr. Marsden insists that the kitchens, where more than 1,300 meals are prepared for patients and doctors each day, must be renovated. When is the work going to be done, he asks. Are they going to wait for an outbreak of food poisoning or something like typhoid? Mr. Tony Smith, acting hospital secretary at North Middlesex, said that he could not comment in detail, but might wish to do so after seeing Mr. Marsden's statement. He explained, "The Area Health Authority is very much aware of the need to improve the catering facilities at the hospital and has arranged advisory visits by the Public Health Department during the last year. A member of the Area Health Authority has personally visited the kitchens in the last few weeks."
A government announcement has brought new hope to about 50 families who booked holidays with the ill-fated Courtline Company through an Enfield firm of travel agents. The Secretary for Trade, Mr. Peter Shaw, has said that all the money paid for holidays that were never taken will be refunded in full from an interest-free loan which the government will make to the industry. The news has been greeted with elation by Mr. Alfred Rowe, Managing Director of Victor Travel of Enfield Town. He said, "I am absolutely delighted that the negotiations carried out by the industry have borne fruit."
The Federation of Enfield Residents and Allied Associations feel they are being ignored by a Borough Council committee. Members agreed at the Ferrer meeting on Monday the 16th of September to write a letter of protest to the Town Clerk, Mr. Wilfred Day. They are angry because the Council's Road Safety Advisory Committee have failed to consider 5 items referred to them by Ferrer. A meeting of the committee, which should also have been held on the same night, was cancelled because there was not enough business on the agenda. Ferrer Chairman, Mr. Cyril Thompson, said, "We have referred 5 items to them, yet they have not met because there is not enough business for them on the agenda. It seems they are ignoring us."
Members of the Borough Council's Town Planning Committee were shocked to hear that Barclays Bank building at 20 the Town is not to be protected from future demolition. Mr. Anthony Crosland, Secretary of State for the Environment, has refused to confirm a building preservation notice served by the Borough Council because he does not regard the building as being of sufficient merit. Alderman Ron St. John protested, "Barclays Bank is a superb example of the time it was built. God forbid that it should go." Councillor John Bowyer, chairman of the committee, agreed with Alderman St. John, but pointed out that at present there was no suggestion that the building would be demolished. The notices had originally been served when the bank had applied for planning permission to erect illuminated signs on the outside of the building. Since then, the bank have decided instead to put up non-illuminated signs, over which the council have no planning control.
Enfield residents are being asked to move over and make room for families from overcrowded inner London. The call comes from a government working party who have just completed a survey of the housing land available in the suburbs. In a report to Mr. Reg Friesen, the Minister of Housing and Construction, they attack the outer London boroughs for dragging their feet in the race to house the 130,000 families who are technically homeless in the capital. They urge a big speed up in the housing building programme, including the release of more marginal areas of Greenbelt land and building on allotments and school playing fields which will be relocated in the Greenbelt. The Greater London Council should be given a bigger share of future developments, they say. Councils that are reluctant to use open land for housing were given a clear warning by Mr. Gerald Kaufman, Chairman of the Working Party and Under Secretary of State at the Department of the Environment. He said at a press conference, "If they don't get on and do the job themselves, the GLC or one of the inner London boroughs will take over the land and do the job for them." Following the report, Mr. Friesen has written to the leaders of all London boroughs and the GLC seeking a rapid improvement in house building. The Action Group's report was discussed at a recent meeting of the Borough Council's Town Planning Committee. Council officers were asked to carry out an investigation of any possible housing land in the borough.
John Charles William Castleman, who is charged with the murder of his wife, a former Enfield shop manageress, was remanded on bail in his own recognizance of £10,000 and sureties totalling £2,250 until October the 9th at Cheshunt Magistrates Court a few weeks ago. A condition of bail was that Castleman, a 51-year-old administrative assistant, should reside with one of the sureties in Mill Hill and should report to Mill Hill Police Station 3 times a week.
Listeners may be interested in a venture whereby they can get to concerts at the Royal Festival Hall using a special coach service from Enfield direct to the South Bank. If you are free on Tuesday evening, the 19th of November 1974, the London Symphony Orchestra, conducted by Walter Weller, will play Vltava by Smetana, as well as Bartók's Piano Concerto No. 2 and Dvorak's Symphony No. 8. Listeners may get further details from the Arts and Entertainments Office, Central Library, Cecil Road, Enfield, Middlesex, or they can telephone 01 366 2244. I'll just repeat that. The Arts and Entertainments Office, Central Library, Cecil Road, Enfield, Middlesex, or telephone 01 366 2244.
And locally, the Enfield Arts and Entertainments Department are presenting a variety spectacular at Edmonton Town Hall, Knights Lane, Edmonton N9, on Thursday the 31st of October at 8 p.m. This is a superb evening's entertainment with well-known names from the Variety Club circuit. Top of the bill will be the enormously successful Ruby Murray, who is supported by a number of first-class acts. Tickets are available from the main box office at Enfield Central Library or by applying personally to all borough libraries.
Well, that just about wraps up the 300th edition of the Enfield Microphone. So Old Father Time says it's time to say goodbye from
Dennis
and me, Peter.